Woo! The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, is here. Back in the BDSM studios, and oh boy, or it's not plural, it's only one studio. Of course, that's Brian's Dungeon of Sex and Magic. Not to say that I practice or engage in either, but, well, wait, who am I kidding? Anyway, we're back at it with something, boy, it feels like it's been a long while, but in all actuality, it hasn't. This past July of 2018, of course, now we're in January of 2019, but in July of 2018, as I've done many times on Sovereign Tech, I review the DC animated superhero films, and there is a larger, within that really, there is a larger DC animated movie universe, which now comprises of 12 films, and we are going to review the 12th. But in July, we did review the 11th, which was a direct... not prequel, but this movie is a direct sequel to the movie that came out in July. Now, in July, DC, what would it be, DCUA? I don't know. I mean, there's like 30 some odd of the actual DC animated films, but there's a specific universe that kind of plays within the New 52, which often will update classic stories that occurred, much of which is happening here. And within those, there are, I think, specifically 12. But anyway, so within, I've reviewed these movies many times over the years, and I'm a big fan. And as I've said many times, that the DC animated universe, if you were to count that as films, and they are, I mean, most of them are a good hour and a half or and change, where they do match up to the length of a full-on live-action Marvel film. If we counted these as like a genuine universe, kind of like the Marvel, kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or Marvel, whatever they call that, the MCU or the MC, or is it the DCEU? All these terms just get crazy. Anyway, if these were counted as their own theatrical universe, they would blow Marvel out of the water. I've said that every single time, and these movies have failed to disappoint. DC, well, even though with Aquaman, which I reviewed on a recent Sovereign Tech, with Aquaman was a phenomenal film, can easily stand toe-to-toe, not only actual story, effects, and everything else wise, not only movie wise, production wise, but and certainly budget, but as far as like what it's raked in the box office, it can stand toe-to-toe with any Marvel film, which I couldn't be happier about, because I like to see Marvel get a good kick in the fucking pants. And, sorry, that was a little... Okay, I love all comic books. Marvel, I just don't think it deserves necessarily the honors that it gets today. It's fucking madness. Anyway, the DC animated universe is as great as any comic book production going today, if not better and the best, hands down. In fact, something I didn't talk about that, boy, I would have loved to have seen something of within the Aquaman movie, a recent DC animated universe film that I believe I also reviewed was Throne of Atlantis, which was an Aquaman film, but man, that was so hot because you had Wonder Woman and Aquaman getting it on. Oh, that was good. And then, well, anyway, that was all in an alternate universe. But regardless of that, we are going to review Reign of the Supermen, which again is a sequel to July 2018's Death of Superman. Now, this is the ending of the story, which leads itself to... Okay, I'll say it right out front. It is not without problems. Not that it's bad. It's just... there's opportunities missed. It is not without problems, but Reign of the Supermen was great. It was a great film. Laughed my ass off a bunch of times, which is far more than I can usually say at any Marvel film. I do not laugh. Like, the jokes just don't always work as well in Marvel films. I laughed a little bit with Venom, but... Anyway, I think that part of that was just the amazement of seeing Venom on the screen. Now, grant you, it is amazing to see the Death of Superman storyline, which is a classic storyline that ran between like 92 and, well, it went on for a while. So as far as when it actually ended, we'll say 92 to 93, though really went into 94 a bit. I think that storyline basically came to an end when we got the Superman and Lois Lane wedding, which was that 94? I'm pretty sure. Or maybe better yet, it really ended with the death of Hal Jordan, which is going to point at one of the problems with this film. But I really enjoyed this. It was really great. It was not as well done as Death of Superman, and it did feel a little rushed because. So, well, let's talk about this again. The classic. Let me break down what happened back. So, starting with. Oh boy, it was like Superman, or it was actually, I think it was an issue of Action Comics, but Superman 75 back in 92. Everybody remembers it, the classic, comic book panel where Lois Lane is holding a dead Superman. Everybody remembers that. Capes flittering in the breeze, it's quite a shocking scene. And it was a big deal. Now, grant you, as I've pointed out many times, anytime that I've talked about the Death of Superman storyline, or maybe what could be called the Death and Return of Superman storyline, this was huge. I mean, it was a massive storyline, but really Superman had died many times, even, over the previous 10 years to 1992. I mean, he died like a couple times a year. Really died, and would come back in whatever fashion. But this was there was so much marketing hype around this, and it was really so well done. And the aftermath was so engaging that this became one of the classic, right up there with Crisis on Infinity Earths, or Infinite Earths, right up there with, of course, Nightfall would come after that, Batman's Nightfall, and a bunch of other ones, and Watchmen. I mean, this is one of the biggest events in comic book history that is getting put to animated celluloid. So if I think of it, I'll link to my review of the first movie in this duology. It's not a trilogy, but I'll link to my review of Death of Superman if you want to hear that first, where I talk about a lot of this stuff. But anyway, that movie was fantastic. Like, they really, really delivered that. And much like that one, it's not a panel for panel rendition, and also they have updated it quite a bit to where, I mean, in this movie, in Reign of the Supermen, which is the one we're reviewing now, which came out, I think, officially January 15th, 2019. So very fresh. Like Perry White in it, chief editor at the Daily Planet. Like, he's talking about tweets, he's talking about Twitter and everything. So this is not a direct presentation as if it were 1992 all over again. Okay, this is taking place. It's updated and refreshed for today, which I don't mind that so much. Okay. But I do mind a lot of what was taken out, and something to understand with this is that really the Death and Return of Superman storyline was an act in 3 parts. You really had a trilogy of storylines going on here, and again, the ramifications of the storyline were massive, and we'll get into those. Very far-reaching, and this duology really skips over all that and just gives you sort of the short version. It's kind of like, it's almost like looking at the synoptic gospels, right? And this is like Mark, okay, where it's the shortest one. You can read it in a couple hours or something, and it doesn't have all the extra, but maybe very interesting shit, like, say, the Gospel of Matthew would, right? Where, actually, Jesus wasn't the only one that that was resurrected, that came back from the dead. Actually, there was a bunch of people that came back from the dead, and amazingly, nobody in Roman history fucking talked about that a bunch of people, as it clearly says in the book of Matthew, a bunch of people were resurrected that day, not just Christ. The dead were rising and talking to people and, singing hallelujah and walking through the streets. How the fuck did nobody talk about that? Such an incredible event. It's almost like it didn't happen. Oh, sorry. Got a little ahead of myself there. Anyway, this is a very abridged version of the Death and Return of Superman storyline, because originally you had where Doomsday comes in and ends up killing Superman, right? And that's the Death of Superman. That's that whole storyline. Then you would have the Reign of the Supermen. Now, they may rename these 3 acts different things. Like, I think today, if you bought a collected edition of it, the middle act, which is what the title of this movie is referencing, Reign of the Supermen, where there are like replacements for Superman, who some are claiming to be Superman, some not. Maybe they'll call it World Without Superman, I think. So there's a bunch of different names for this stuff, but, the story is more or less the same. But then you would get the third part, which is the return of Superman. And that third part is what gets really glossed over with this, even though you end up effectively with the same end game. But there are some very strange additions that happen, additions, okay, as in adding, that happen within this. Like Doomsday becomes a part of the storyline. Not Doomsday, Darkseid from, Apocalypse. He ends up becoming a part of the storyline, which was a weird addition. And like Cyborg Superman ends up creating a robot or a cyber Justice League. I mean, a lot of very odd additions, and the problem, and I don't mind if they want to add shit in, like when they did the Killing Joke. Okay, when they made an animated film out of the Killing Joke, I love the additions of Batgirl fucking Batman, like, literally having sex and having kind of this wild relationship. I know that all the critics complained about it. I thought it was fucking hot as hell, and it was wonderful. I completely approve of that addition. But this movie puts in a lot of things that are fine, bringing in Darkseid. That's a nice angle. I can dig that. But they removed a lot of things, or they didn't cover a lot of things that honestly were lacking and were missing, because they're some of the most memorable moments of the death and return of Superman's storyline. In fact, even the way that they don't exactly explain how Superman even gets his powers back in this, the way that it happened in the original comic books was incredible. Okay, but anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. So, Reign of the Supermen, Superman's dead. That's how this opens up, and you're getting introduced to 4 characters, each of who are kind of claiming to be Superman. You have Superboy, or who claims to be Superman, but is actually a clone created by Lex Luthor. And folks, look, there's no real spoiler. I mean, I could say spoiler alerts, but for fuck's sake, the comic book's been out forever. Everybody knows the fucking story. Like they waste no time, because the other Superman. So you have Superboy created by Lex Luthor, who's a clone of Superman that had to get released early or whatever. They did a really great job with that character in this. I was very pleased with that, including they made it so that he would talk like with his kind of 90s edge, because the story was originally in the 90s and Superboy was supposed to be the hip, cool character. And so he'd say things like funky fresh. He says things like funky fresh in this, but they explain it by the fact that he was watching 90s sitcoms or something, like while he was, I guess, incubating in a tank at Luthor Corp. Okay, so whatever, that works. Okay, it was fine. Anyway, you then you meet Cyborg Superman, who looks like this half man, half Kryptonian, supposedly half machine. They very quickly tell you that that's Hank Henshaw, when that was a long reveal for. Well, let me introduce the other characters and explain that. But anyway, they do, they know the deal. Like, anybody probably that's watching this has a very good idea of how this storyline went down. There's no need to make it a secret. Okay, they don't waste time, telling you when that Superboy is a clone. Okay, like, I mean, they really don't waste time with that. They did, speaking of that, oh boy, all the things let me do this in order. Steel, of course, you have Steel, who never really in the comic books claimed to be Superman originally, but some people wondered about it. Certainly when they were building up to the Reign of the Supermen storyline getting released, there was conversation that maybe he's that guy, maybe that's Superman. But you find out pretty quickly that it's not. Steel is out of the 4. Steel is probably my favorite character to come out of the Reign of the Supermen. Even though I love the character of Guardian, but he got no play in Death of Superman, completely missing from that, and also no play in the Reign of the Supermen, which is a real shame. But regardless of that, Guardian didn't never claim to be Superman. It's not Superman. He's a regular human being with a pretty funky shield. It kind of sounds like Captain America, but no, it's way cooler. And then you have the Eradicator, who you don't originally, like in the comic books, you didn't know that it was the Eradicator. You thought, a lot of people thought it was Superman. It wasn't until later on that you find out that it's the Eradicator, and you find out the Eradicator was created by Superman's grandfather, who created the program to protect Kryptonian life, and so that's more or less what it's doing within this film and within the comic book storyline. Even though originally Eradicator was a villain, when Superman dies, it realizes its programming was flawed, and it failed at protecting Kryptonian life, and so it becomes Superman. It is far more robotic in this movie the Eradicator is. In fact, I think they even call it a hologram. It's far more robotic, as to where, the Eradicator in the comic books acted very human, and you actually thought he was Superman. The only thing that was weird about him is he had a visor on and everything, but otherwise he looked exactly like Superman. Not so in the animated film, regardless of that. So you had these 4 Supermen. Now, again, in the comic book storyline, Reign of the Supermen, not the movie, but the comic books, there was a lot of questions. Like, wait, is Superboy some kind of like rebirthed Superman? Is the cyborg Superman, is that actually Superman enhanced with Kryptonian technology? Is the Eradicator actually Superman, but he seems really violent? What's the deal with that? Did Superman pissed off that he got offed? What's the score there? And again, with Steel, you found out pretty quick that was John Henry Irons, right? And that's fine. Because as soon as he takes it off, he's black and whatever. I'm all about a black Superman. I really am. Actually, like I said, Steel's one of my favorite characters within the Superman family and within DC Comics overall. I really, really always dug that suit, the cape, the hammer, the whole thing. I really thought it was so cool. I'm not knocking that at all, not even by a long shot. Anyway, so you don't really, it's kind of disappointing that there isn't a whole lot of play other than maybe with Eradicator and Hank Henshaw, even though, again, it doesn't take long for them to clarify what's going on. There's no play on the fact that, these might actually, or one of these guys might actually be Superman Reborn. They don't play on that at all. A little bit, there's a moment between Cyborg Superman and Lois Lane, but it's all very, very abridged, because this is a movie that clocks in at about an hour and a half. And really, the whole first hour is Reign of Supermen, and then you get 30 minutes at the end that is more or less the return of Superman storyline within it. And the Justice League play a pretty heavy role in this, more so than they did in the actual. They were certainly a big part of the Reign of Superman storyline, but they're a lot bigger in this, a lot bigger. Though there's some great moments between Wonder Woman and Lois Lane, where actually, it almost looked like it was going to turn into a triad or something. I was like, between her and Superman and everything. Of course, Superman does come back. You find out that Superman was incubating in the Fortress of Solitude, not like Superboy, but that he was incubating, and when he comes out, he has the black suit on, he has the long hair, even has a little bit of a beard, very much making him look like Jesus. He didn't have the beard in the comic books, but he did have the long hair, and Superman would have long hair for a while, pretty much up until... I guess the wedding, maybe they fixed that, but when he became Electric Superman, they certainly made sure that was gone. They unfortunately didn't give, with his black suit, he classically had the jetpack boots. They didn't give him those. Instead, he actually flies his old Kryptonian ship that he arrived in as a baby. That was kind of interesting that he uses that, but that's all part of the changes made, with this movie as compared to the comic books. Again, I don't expect fidelity to the comic books, but here's the thing, is that as you find out that Hank Henshaw is really a bad dude, and you don't find out until much later, Hank Henshaw creates like this machine city. Okay, as where in the movie Reign of the Supermen, he ends up making like a watchtower, space state watchtower, like the Justice League base. He makes one, or he more or less commandeers one in space and everything. And with him he made the machine city at Coast City, which is where Hal Jordan comes from. And Hal Jordan's in this movie, and Nathan Fillion does a great job, and he's fucking hilarious as always. One of my favorite comic book characters of all time, the Green Lantern. And when Hank Henshaw, the cyborg Superman, makes his machine city on top of Coast City, destroying Coast City, Hal Jordan goes nuts. And this is what leads very much to Hal Jordan becoming Parallax, which was this wildly popular, popular character, but a wildly popular villain. Because he would, and eventually Hal Jordan would, again, he would die. They would have a Death of Hal Jordan comic that was a major deal. But Parallax would be a real threat to the Justice League and pretty much the entire DC universe. We're talking about a really crazy powerful Hal Jordan who has who's a villain now, has a very serious mean streak. And it made sense. And it was an epic it was a very, very emotional telling, especially for comic books and especially, quote unquote, for kids. That here, you have Hal Jordan's hometown get wiped out by this guy who was claiming to be Superman, that being Hank Henshaw, cyborg Superman. And of course he's going to go nuts after that. And he's going to, well, fuck this. I'm going to become so powerful that, nothing's going to be able to stop me, and I'll be able to resurrect Coast City. Because that's what Hal Jordan does after Hank Henshaw destroys his hometown, is he goes to the Guardians of Oa, the Guardians for the Green Lantern Corps, and he says, hey, we can do this. We have the power. We can rebuild Coast City. We should do that. And the Guardians say no. And Hal Jordan just, again, he snaps and he, starts wiping out Green Lanterns and everything. I mean, it's a badass storyline, but you get none of that in this whatsoever. And again, the movie itself, Reign of the Supermen, is great. It's actually really well done. But the storylines that were set up more specifically, not during Reign of the Supermen, but more during Return of the Superman, part of the story. To not have those there it's a lost opportunity, because it's an epic fucking story. And it sort of makes me feel, even though the DC animated universe has done a fine job with building up villains, compelling villains, as to where Marvel completely fails as far as villains go. They can't make a great villain to save their life. Which is part of the reason why those movies suck so bad. But anyway, I just felt like, here was your chance to really have a great villain. But the thing is that I think it would be a villain where it all just made a little too much sense why he was doing what he did. And then the kids would end up liking him. Because I know certainly that's how I felt, is I liked Parallax. I thought Parallax was badass, when Hal Jordan became that. And I liked him more than I liked the heroes. And I think that's something that, for whatever reason, by and large, the comic book industry is trying to stay away from. And I don't know why. I don't know what the fear is with that, because obviously over the decades in the comic books themselves, the physical comic books, they've been able to create tremendous villains, that are as more interesting or just as powerful, just as engaging as any of the heroes. So I don't get what's behind that when it comes to taking these things to film, animated or otherwise. But this really was a missed opportunity, to get into some of those other storylines. And there's other things that happen around the death of Superman that are massive and just have ramifications that would go on for years in the comic books. So again, to not touch on that, what a shame. What a waste to not even lay hints for some of that stuff to happen. That's the part that disappointed me. Now, that said, okay, just the fact that they didn't take advantage of more build-up with the four Supermen, they rushed the return of Superman significantly to where he gets his powers back within a few days, as to where really, not even that really, as to where within the comic books, you had, how it actually happened is during the attack on the Machine City that cyborg Superman / Hank Henshaw creates over Coast City, he blasts, the Eradicator sacrifices himself. This kind of happens in the movie. Okay, but the Eradicator sacrifices himself, jumps in front of Superman from getting blasted by this just massive hunk of kryptonite gas, effectively. And so when that happens, Eradicator's body, all the Kryptonian power within it, transfers like a rainbow. You see it right on the panel. I'll never forget it. It's an amazing issue of Superman. It transfers right back onto the actual Superman, onto Kal-El. And the Eradicator dies, at least for a while. The Eradicator dies because of it. And it's just this empty husk. But then suddenly, oh shit, Superman's got his powers back, and he goes, he just goes ass crazy on Hank Henshaw. And it's a great moment. It's awesome. And, I'll never forget the double panel when he comes back. He has the suit on, the whole thing. It's great. You don't get that powerful of an event. You don't get that sacrifice from the Eradicator, again, which was another powerful story because the Eradicator originally was a villain. You get none of that background in this movie. So there's just so much missing that was really, really emotional, tragic, epic that existed within the comic book series. Or within and granted, it took place across Justice League comics, across all the Superman titles that existed at the time, Man of Steel and all that. I mean, there were 4 Superman comics at the time, and each Superman, during this reign of the Superman line in the comic books back in 92, 93, each Superman got to take over one of the titles. It was such a brilliant fucking move and such great writing. It was, oh man, it was so well done. So for this movie to rush it, I mean, if they did another film, what they should have done a trilogy, is my point. Okay, especially if you have July to January, what do you got there? Some odd 6 months, barely. Just do the third movie in 6 months. It would have been great. I don't know why DC was scared of doing a trilogy with this. They should have, because they rushed it way too much in this film. Or not that they rushed it. What they presented had fine pacing and timing. But compared to what the storyline originally was, it was rushed. And again, that's just a shame. So anyway, to talk about the movie, I don't want this review to go too long, but to talk about the movie itself, you have all of the same voice actors from Death of Superman from back in July of 2018, and they all do a great job. Jerry O'Connell's phenomenal as Superman once again, and Rebecca Romijn, she is fantastic as Lois Lane. Ryan Wilson, goddamn, is this guy multi-talented or what? What a fucking sweetheart. He makes Lex Luthor so cool. I mean, he really does. He just delivers, and everything Lex Luthor says has just such sass to it, and you can feel like you can get the sense of his feeling of superiority over everybody else, and his almost his impatience. And yet at the same time, it's humorous when he does it because, I don't know, Ryan Wilson, his voice is tremendous. I mean, he's a great actor too. Of course, if anyone saw the recent Short Trek where he reprised his role as Harry Mudd, oh, that was dynamite. I think that was the best Short Trek, but we'll talk about that during the Star Trek update later on in the month of January 2019 here. But all the voice actors were totally on. Tony Todd, this surprised me. As soon as I heard Darkseid talking and Tony Todd was doing the voice, usually Darkseid talks with almost like Darth Vader, where it's this very, very deep voice, which works for the character. But to have Tony Todd do it gave it such an air of menace. If you don't know Tony Todd, he's been kind of like a hero. He's a black guy. He's been in so many films and done so much voice work. You'll instantly know who he is when you see him. But he's done great villains in movies. He's done great heroes. In fact, I mean, speaking of Star Trek, honestly, where most people would probably remember him was as Kern, Worf's brother in Star Trek The Next Generation, which he did a tremendous job as. Just a great actor. And man, I thought his interpretation of Darkseid, voice-wise, was just right on the nose. I mean, it was so solid. In fact, a lot of people don't remember, speaking, kind of connecting the dots, what I think is actually the greatest thing that DC animation has really produced, of course, from the wheelhouse of Bruce Timm. No, not Batman the Animated Series, and I've said this a lot. Superman the Animated Series, which was kind of a sequel show to Batman the Animated Series back in the day, I thought was a brilliant show and was far more epic and exciting than I think even Batman the Animated Series. Steel was in that. There was a point where Steel comes into play in that, and he was such a great character. But I don't think a lot of people remember the guy that voiced Steel. Now, in this movie, it was what's his name? Cress Williams, I think, who did a great job. But in Superman the Animated Series, Michael Dorn did the voice of Steel, which of course was Worf. So that's kind of interesting to have Kern now officially. Not that Superman the Animated Series is connected to the 12 DCAU films, but yeah, it's cool to have them in the same universe a bit. It would have been great. I would have loved it if they, and I don't know why they didn't. Maybe Michael Dorn just refused. I think it would have been tremendous to have Michael Dorn reprise his voice role as Steel in this movie, and to have, and then to have Tony Todd doing Darkseid. Oh, that could have been really cool. So anyway, missed opportunity, but not a huge deal. Sam Liu, who's done a few of the DCAU films, did the direction here. His direction is, as it has been, was fully on display and very well done. Frederick Weidman did the music, he's also done a lot of the music for different DCAU films. There's nothing terribly exciting or engaging in this movie, but it's completely serviceable, and I kind of got to the point, I'll admit this, I got to the point with movies, animated, cinematic, whatever, live action, you name it. I got to the point where I'm like, yeah, you really can't do an unserviceable score anymore. Like they've figured it out how to make music that just works for the film and sits in the background nicely, even if it isn't something that's really stirring. And so for a while I was thinking, I don't really have to mention the music anymore unless it's a real standout. But no, now I think I need to continue to say when the music is just serviceable, because I finally saw a movie in 2018 where the music was completely unserviceable. The music was a detraction. It was fucking horrendous. And that music is for Solo: A Star Wars Story. I was so unimpressed, and it really, it hurt the movie, that score. Oh, that was bad. So it's important to even mention just when a score is serviceable. Anyway, so Frederick Weidman did a great job. There's nothing technically wrong with this movie at all. Again, it was a very funny film, much to Nathan Fillion's portrayal of Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, and it is just, he's a damned riot. Batman, the whole Justice League are cracking jokes right and left. Great moments between Diana, and Lois Lane, of course, Wonder Woman and Lois Lane, that really worked. Jerry O'Connell does a great Superman, which I have the hardest time believing that he is voicing Superman, but he's done it again and did very, very well. So yeah, nothing really to complain on that front. It came together. It worked. It's an enjoyable movie. It's a really that. I had high hopes for this film because I knew how much happened during the reign of the Superman storyline. And I was disappointed when I found out. I was hopeful for it, but then as soon as I found out this was, they weren't going to do a third film within this storyline, I was like, oh shit, they're going to rush this. This is going to go too fast. They're not going to get everything in. But I kind of hoped they'd still be able to. But again, they didn't. There was so much that happened within the Death and Return of Superman storyline. It is a pity. Maybe they'll touch on it again in the future. I don't know. It's possible. But the way they changed things up, adding in Darkseid as kind of a primary villain behind this, and a thrust behind what was, behind Doomsday, which that gets made explicit in this as well. All of that just made it, I don't know, it made it kind of disappointing. But I thought the way that they treated the four Supermen, other than the Eradicator, they changed that a little too much. But what they did with Superboy was great. Though, okay, I was going to mention this earlier. Another thing that they dropped the ball on is, at the time when Reign of the Supermen happened, people thought Lex Luthor was dead. And his son, who was just called Lex Luthor II, more or less, or Alexander, was actually running Luthor Corp, or Lex Corp. And thought that, because Luthor Corp, that was with Smallville, right? With the show Smallville. Anyway, everybody thought that it was his son that was running the show. And that was a really interesting storyline in and of itself. There were so many storylines getting weaved within the whole Death and Return of Superman, whatever series. And that wasn't a part of this, even though what would end up happening down the line is that people would find out that Lex Luthor II was really just a clone of Lex Luthor, just like Superboy was a clone of Superman. And of course, in this movie, they make it explicit that it was not just a clone of Superman, but he was also given the brains of Lex Luthor, which maybe they'd do something interesting with that. Anyway, just again, a lot of missed opportunities. So many storylines that could have gotten weaved into this. I have a hard time believing. It very much feels like they've got this animation, they've got the great voice actors, they've got all this down pat, to where it can't take that long to make these movies. And the writing's good, okay? The writing, in fact, it's not just good, the writing's great. and the lines land, and the jokes land, everything works. But there's no way they couldn't produce this on a more regular schedule. Like, there's no reason you couldn't do 10 of these movies a year. Now, you could say people would get sick of it, sure. But when you're dealing with, shall we say, holy ground, Highlander, okay, like the death and return of Superman storyline, you got to do that one right and take the time, because there's so much going on at that. And that's why that was such a big story. That's why it worked. That's why it sold so much, because it wasn't just the death of Superman that was happening. There was a whole lot more getting weaved in. Of course, eventually, there's the corruption of Hal Jordan. There's, into Parallax. There's all these different things going on. You find out what the Guardian's doing, or what Guardian, not the Guardian as in like the Green Lantern Corps Guardians. There's just a lot there that, again, we missed. So, if I was going to give it out of 10, I'd give it a good 8 out of 10. I mean, it really works. Like, it delivers. And Lois Lane is great in it, especially. I'm really pleased at how much action they gave her in this. She very much saves the day in a very real way. They hit most of the high notes, a lot of the high notes, but there's just a lot of underlying stuff and a lot of threads that they didn't even touch. But I'm not going to hold that against it. Okay. So just on its own, if you didn't have that knowledge, if you never read that story, if you never read Death and Return of Superman, or like the collected volumes of it from 92 and 93, this movie's going to absolutely be an 8 out of 10. So I'll give it that. If I wanted to count what they didn't put into it against it, I'd probably give it a 6, because of all the missed opportunities at just intense drama, high drama. That they could have had in this that just wasn't there. God damn it. I don't know if they're ever going to. I mean, now that DC's doing Rebirth, I can't even really keep track of what the fuck DC's doing anymore anyway, which is part of the reason that I really enjoy these movies, because it gives you, I mean, the DCAU, and who knows what the hell's happening with the cinematic universe, right? Like, Aquaman could be its own universe, so could Wonder Woman. They don't even have to attach them anymore. In fact, it's almost insulting just how well the Justice League gels in the DCAU compared to the flop that the Justice League movie was. What was that, a couple of years ago now in theaters? The live action one and everything. Even when you put those characters separate, and you get tremendous movies: Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and so on. It's really, I mean, I don't know why. Just get the fucking writers from the DCAU and put them in charge of the live action universe, DC, for fuck's sake. But the DCAU and really the Injustice comic series, which takes place in an alternate universe of DC, those are the main things of DC that I consume today, because whatever they're calling the primary universe of DC just doesn't make any sense anymore. Like, I don't get exactly what the fuck they're doing. And I want to, Action Comics 1000 should have been this huge event, but like, I can't keep track. I don't know what's happened and what hasn't. So I just stick to the Injustice comics. And I like some, like Gotham Girls is good, or Gotham City Garage, not Gotham Girls. Gotham City Garage is great. And Bombshells, those kind of alternate universes that they deal in, not necessarily Elseworlds, but actual alternate universes, are tremendous. And DC really shines in those, much like Marvel did with the Ultimate X-Men and Ultimate Spider-Man and so on, which were so solid back in the late 90s and early aughts, and boy, fuck were they. Or Ultimate Fantastic Four, that was one of the best comic runs ever, in my opinion. But Ultimate Spider-Man was definitely taking the cake back then. I was enjoying Spider-Man at the time. Anyway, so yeah, there you have it. Reign of the Supermen. Yeah, I give it an 8 out of 10, just on its own merits. As far as, what it's missing, and it's missing a lot, I would count off a lot for it. But again, I don't hold these comic book movies to any kind of fidelity anymore, because they don't care. They're just trying to they're not looking to appease comic book fans anymore. They're just trying to really get the lowest common denominator to watch this shit. So with comic book movies in general, Marvel's more egregious than DC, but certainly all of them are doing it. I expect no fidelity, to where it has it really pays any serious attention to the source material so much. And that definitely shines in this. But what did get presented was really cool. And again, if you really want to enjoy this, go back and read the original comics. You can get great collected editions of this, and it's just one of the biggest moments in comic book history back in 92. I mean, it really is. And I've told the story many times. I remember when I read that it happened in the newspaper. And I cried, I mean, granted I was like 11, but, I cried, I bawled my fucking eyes out when it went down. So anyway, check out the movies. They're enjoyable, but to get the real goods, you got to read the original comic books. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. A good duology, just a lot of missed opportunities for future films. I really wish they took those shots, but they didn't. So that's it for that. Of course, a lot more content to come out throughout the end of January here. As you know, I deliver the goods for you all the time. And February is going to be another month where all kinds of action is going to happen. Just you wait and see. I will see all of you on the other side, and go see The Reign of Supermen.